The crystal towers of Viridian Prime shook as another solar flare hit the planet's weakening shields. Ambassador Zixtal pressed his translucent hands against the window of the High Council chamber and watched the sky burn orange and red. His people were dying, and time was running out. The radiation levels have increased by 30% in the last week, reported Chief Scientist Vel Knox, her crystalline body flickering with nervous energy. Our shields cannot hold much longer. The star is collapsing faster than we predicted. Zixtal turned away from the terrible view outside. Around the circular chamber, the 12 members of the High Council waited for his decision. Their bodies, made of living crystal that had evolved over millions of years, now looked fragile and scared. The beautiful blue and green lights that normally danced through their transparent forms had dimmed to barely visible sparks. "How long do we have?" Zixtal asked, though he dreaded the answer. 6 months, maybe less, Velnox replied. "After that, the radiation will kill every living thing on the surface. Our underground cities might last another year, but eventually even they will fail." 12 billion Colorians lived on Viridian Prime, 12 billion souls who had never known war, never harmed another species, never done anything but live peaceful lives studying art and science. Now they faced extinction because their sun was dying. "We must send the distress signal," said Council Member Hicks Von. "Surely someone in the galaxy will help us." Zixtal had been thinking the same thing, but he also knew how the galaxy worked. The strong survived, the weak died. The Colorians had nothing to offer in return for help. They were not warriors like the Draknari. They did not have advanced technology like the Vorthek Collective. They were just a peaceful people who made beautiful art and studied the stars. But what choice did they have? "Send the signal," Zixtal ordered. "Broadcast it on all emergency frequencies. Tell the galaxy that we need help." 3 hours later, the message went out across the stars. It was simple and desperate. The Colorians explained their situation and begged for help evacuating their people to New Colorian, a world they had discovered in a distant system that could support their kind of life. The first response came from the Draknari hegemony. General Thokvar appeared on the communication screen, his reptilian features twisted in what might have been amusement. "Ambassador Zixtal," the Draknari general said, "we received your message. Unfortunately, the hegemony cannot spare resources for evacuation operations. We suggest you prepare your people for honorable death." The screen went dark. Zixtal felt his inner light dim even more. The Draknari were known for their military strength, but they only helped those who could fight beside them. The peaceful Colorians were useless to them. The next response came 2 days later from the Vorthek Collective. Prime Calculators N44 delivered their answer with typical Vorthek logic. The resource expenditure required for evacuating 12 billion beings across 847 light years exceeds any potential benefit to the collective, the artificial being stated. This operation has a 97.3% probability of failure and would bankrupt any civilization that attempted it. We advise you to accept the logical outcome. More rejections followed. The Asterian Trade Federation said they lacked the ships. The Luminary Confederacy claimed their vessels were not designed for mass evacuation. The Zenthari Empire simply laughed at the request. One by one, the civilized species of the galaxy turned their backs on the dying Colorians. Zixtal began to understand a terrible truth about the universe. Compassion was a luxury that only the strong could afford, and apparently, no one felt strong enough to help Dot as the days passed. The situation on Viridian Prime grew worse. The solar flares came more frequently and with greater intensity. Colorian cities began shutting down surface operations and moving underground. Children stopped playing in the crystal gardens. The art galleries closed as their delicate sculptures cracked from radiation exposure. Zixtal was preparing to tell his people that no help was coming when something unexpected happened. Lieutenant Kixmal burst into the council chamber, his usually calm demeanor shattered with excitement. "Ambassador, we have received a response to our distress signal. But it is strange." "Strange how?" Zixtal asked. "The signal comes from a world called Earth in the outer spiral arm. We have no records of this species in our databases. Their message is very short." Kixmal activated the communication system. A face appeared on the screen, unlike anything the Calorians had ever seen. It was soft and fleshy, with small eyes and hair covering the top of its head. The being wore some kind of uniform and spoke in a rough, harsh voice. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. We received your distress call. We are coming to help. Hold on." The message ended. The council chamber fell silent. "Earth?" asked Council Member Hicks Vaughn. "What do we know about Earth?" Chief Scientist Vel Knox worked frantically at her data console. "Very little. It appears to be a small planet in an isolated system. The atmospheric readings are disturbing, extremely. High oxygen content, dangerous radiation from their star, intense gravity. According to our classifications, it would be labeled a death world." Death world? Zixtal had heard the term before. It referred to planets with conditions so harsh that most civilized species could not survive there. Only the most primitive and savage races evolved on such worlds. "Should we reply?" asked Lieutenant Kixmal. Zixtal considered this. The humans had said they were coming to help, but what could primitives from a death world possibly do? Every advanced civilization in the galaxy had refused to help. How could backward savages succeed where the mighty Draknari and logical Vorthek had refused to even try? On the other hand, they were the only ones who had offered help. Send a reply. Zixtal decided. Thank them for their offer, but explain the scope of what we need. 12 billion people evacuated across nearly 850 light years. Perhaps when they understand the true scale, they will realize it is impossible. The reply went out immediately. The response came back faster than Zixtal expected. Captain Morrison appeared on screen again. This time he was surrounded by other humans, all of them looking at data displays and talking quickly among themselves. The captain's expression was serious but determined. Ambassador Zixtal, we understand the situation. 12 billion souls need evacuation. We are mobilizing our fleet now. Our estimated arrival time at your location is 3 weeks. Start preparing your people for transport. We will not let you die. The transmission ended, leaving the council in stunned silence. 3 weeks? Whispered Council Member Hicks Vaughn. It takes most species 3 months just to plan such an operation. Chief Scientist Vel Knox looked up from her console, her crystalline features bright with disbelief. I am detecting massive energy signatures from their system. They appear to be moving their entire space fleet toward us. Zixtal felt something he had not experienced in months. Hope. It was small and fragile, but it was there. These strange humans from their death world were actually coming. Whether they could help or not remained to be seen, but they were the first species to even try. Begin evacuation preparations, he ordered the council. If these humans are brave enough to attempt the impossible, the least we can do is be ready. As the council members hurried away to begin their work, Zixtal remained at the window, looking up at the angry red sky. Somewhere beyond those burning clouds, a species he had never heard of was racing across the galaxy to save his people. He wondered what kind of beings would risk everything for complete strangers. He was about to find out. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the command center of Luna Station, staring at the massive display screen that showed the Earth fleet preparing for departure. Ships of every size and type were gathering in Earth orbit. Cargo haulers, military vessels, civilian transports, even old mining ships that had been pulled out of retirement. It was the largest fleet Earth had ever assembled. "Status report," Morrison called out to his staff. Commander Lisa Kane stepped forward with a data pad. "We have 847 ships ready for the first wave. Engineering teams are working around the clock to modify them for calorian physiology. It is not going well." Morrison rubbed his tired eyes. He had not slept in 3 days. None of them had. The scope of what they were attempting was staggering. 12 billion beings needed to be evacuated across a distance that would take most ships 3 weeks to travel. And they had to do it before. The calorian sun killed everyone on the planet. "What are the problems?" Morrison asked. Chief Engineer Alex Turner joined them at the display. His uniform was stained with grease, and his hands were covered in cuts from working on ship modifications. "The calorians are nothing like us," he said. "They need a completely different atmosphere. Their gravity is 1/10 of ours. The temperature has to be kept at exactly -40 degrees Celsius, or their crystal bodies start to crack." Dr. Susan Ward looked up from her medical station. "That is not the worst part. They absorb radiation for energy instead of eating food like we do. But too much radiation kills them. We have to find the exact balance, or they will either starve or die from radiation poisoning." Morrison felt a headache building behind his eyes. Every solution seemed to create 3 new problems. "How long to modify all the ships?" "At our current rate, about 6 months, Turner replied. "We do not have 6 months. We have 3 weeks to get there, and maybe 6 months total, before their planet becomes completely uninhabitable." Navigation specialist Tony Garcia spoke up from his position at the star charts. "Captain, I have been working on the route calculations. The fastest path to Viridian Prime goes through the Nexus asteroid field and past 2 unstable stars. Most species avoid that route because it is too dangerous." "How dangerous?" Morrison asked. 17 ships have been lost in that asteroid field in the past century. The unstable stars throw off radiation bursts that can fry ship electronics from 3 light years away. Communications officer Beth Clark turned from her station. "Captain, we are receiving more transmissions from other species. They want to know what we are doing." "Put them through," Morrison ordered. The screen flickered and showed General Thokvar of the Draknari hegemony. The reptilian warrior looked amused. "Captain Morrison, we are watching your preparations with great interest. Do you truly believe your primitive vessels can accomplish what the greatest civilizations in the galaxy have deemed impossible?" Morrison straightened his shoulders. "We are going to try." "Try?" General Thokvar laughed, showing rows of sharp teeth. "This is not a matter of trying, human. This is a matter of logistics, resources, and capability. You lack all 3. "Maybe," Morrison replied calmly, "but we are still going." The Draknari general leaned forward. "Your ships are held together with metal patches and hope. Your technology is centuries behind ours. You have never attempted anything close to this scale. Why throw away your lives for a species you have never met?" Morrison was quiet for a moment. Around him, his crew continued their frantic preparations. Turner was coordinating with engineering teams across dozens of ships. Dr. Ward was developing new medical protocols for treating crystalline beings. Garcia was plotting courses through some of the most dangerous space in the galaxy. Clark was managing communications with hundreds of ships and thousands of crew members. "Because they asked for help," Morrison finally answered. General Thokvar stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You humans are either very brave or very stupid. I have not decided which." The transmission ended. Almost immediately, another call came through. This time it was Prime Calculator Zen-44 of the Vorthek Collective. "Captain Morrison," the artificial being said in its emotionless voice, "our calculations show a 97.3% probability of mission failure. Your fleet will be destroyed, your crews will die, and the Colorians will perish anyway. Logic dictates that you should abandon this mission. Logic is not everything, Morrison replied. Logic is the foundation of civilization. Without it, we would still be savages fighting over scraps. Morrison looked around at his crew. They were exhausted, stressed, and facing impossible odds. But none of them had suggested giving up. Maybe being a little savage is not such a bad thing. Prime Calculator's N44 processed this for several seconds. Your statement does not compute. Please clarify. Sometimes you have to stop calculating and start doing what is right. The Vorthic being stared at him with glowing blue eyes. Fascinating. We will observe your attempt with great interest. When that transmission ended, Morrison turned back to his crew. All right, people, what do we have? Turner wiped his hands on a rag. I think I have a solution for the atmosphere problem. We can install temporary life support bubbles in the cargo holds of our biggest ships. It will not be comfortable, but it will keep them alive. Dr. Ward nodded. I have been studying their physiology. If we can regulate the radiation exposure, using the ship's medical bay equipment, we can keep them healthy during transport. Garcia pointed to his star charts. I found 3 different routes to Viridian Prime. The safe route takes 5 weeks. The dangerous route takes 3 weeks. The suicide route takes 2 weeks. Which route gives us the best chance of saving the most Colorians? Morrison asked. The dangerous route. We can get there fast enough to evacuate maybe 8 billion people before the planet becomes uninhabitable. Morrison nodded. Then that is the route we take. Clark looked up from her communication station. Captain, Admiral Kane wants to speak with you. Admiral Kane appeared on the screen. She looked as tired as Morrison felt. Jake, the World Council is getting nervous. They are asking if we are sure about this mission. Are you having second thoughts, Admiral? Kane was quiet for a moment. Honestly? Yes. The smart thing to do would be to send a small rescue ship to evacuate maybe a few thousand Colorians. Save who we can and call it a victory. But, Kane smiled grimly, but that is not who we are. We do not leave people behind. If we are going to do this, we do it right. All of them or none of them. Morrison felt a surge of pride for his species. Humanity had many flaws, but they never backed down from helping others. How many ships can you give me? Every ship we have. I am stripping the home defense fleet, pulling vessels out of deep space exploration, even requisitioning civilian transports. You will have over 1,000 ships by the time you reach Viridian Prime. That might actually be enough, Turner said quietly. Dr. Ward looked at her medical projections. If we can solve the life support issues, and if we can make multiple trips, we might be able to evacuate everyone. Garcia studied his navigation charts. It will be the most complex space operation in human history. We will need perfect coordination between hundreds of ships over thousands of light years. Clark nodded. I am already working on communication protocols. We will need real-time translation software to coordinate with the Colorians. Morrison looked at each of his crew members. They were scared but determined. They knew the odds were against them, but they were going to try anyway. It was the most human thing possible. All right, people. We have 2 weeks to get ready and 3 weeks to get there. After that, we save 12 billion lives or die trying. As his crew scattered to continue their preparations, Morrison stayed at the command center, watching the fleet assemble. Ship after ship joined the formation. Each one represented hundreds of human crew members who had volunteered for a mission that would probably kill them, but they were going anyway. Because somewhere in the galaxy, 12 billion innocent beings were counting on them. The first human ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Viridian system, and Ambassador Zixtal felt his crystalline heart skip a beat. He had expected maybe a dozen vessels, perhaps a small rescue fleet that would try to save a few. 1,000 Colorians. Instead, he was looking at over 300 ships of various sizes, with more arriving every hour. "By the crystal core," whispered Chief Scientist Vel Knox as she stared at the sensor readings. "They actually came." Captain Morrison's face appeared on the communication screen, and Zixtal got his first close look at a human. The being was compact and muscular, with thick bones and dense flesh. His skin was a pinkish color that seemed to radiate heat, and his small eyes moved constantly, taking in everything around him. To Zixtal, he looked like a creature built for survival in the harshest conditions imaginable. "Ambassador Zixtal," Morrison said, his voice rough and direct. "We are here to get your people out. How much time do we have?" The latest solar flare activity suggests perhaps 4 months before the surface becomes completely uninhabitable. Zixtal replied. "But Captain, you must understand the scope of what you are attempting. 12 billion people cannot be evacuated with a few hundred ships." Morrison smiled, and Zixtal was startled by the expression. It was fierce and confident, like a predator that had spotted prey. "Ambassador, this is just the first wave. We have over 1,000 ships coming. Now we need to start coordinating evacuation procedures immediately." Within hours, human shuttlecraft were landing at Colorian spaceports. Across the planet, Zixtal accompanied the first diplomatic team to the surface to meet with the human crew directly. When the shuttle doors opened, he was struck by several things at once. First was the heat. Humans radiated thermal energy like small furnaces. The shuttle interior was warm enough to make a Colorian uncomfortable, and that was with their environmental systems running. Second was their size and density. Captain Morrison was not particularly large by human standards, but he weighed nearly 3 times what Zixtal did, despite being shorter. When Morrison stepped onto the landing pad, his boots made deep impressions in the metal grating. Third was their intensity. The humans moved with purpose and energy that seemed barely contained. They spoke quickly, made decisions instantly, and acted without hesitation. Chief Engineer Turner immediately began scanning the spaceport with handheld devices, while Dr. Ward started taking atmospheric readings, and Communications Officer Clark was already working on translation protocols with the Colorian technicians. "Ambassador," Morrison said, "we need to see your people. How they live, how they travel, what they need for survival. Our ships are being modified right now, but we need to know exactly what we are working with." Zixtal led them through the Crystal City, explaining Colorian physiology and culture as they walked. The humans listened intently, asking practical questions about temperature, atmosphere, radiation tolerance, and social structures. What amazed Zixtal was how quickly they absorbed information and how fast they came up with solutions. "Your people absorb low-level radiation for energy," Dr. Ward said, studying a group of young Colorians in a school. "But too much radiation kills you. We can use our medical bay equipment to regulate exposure levels during transport." Turner was examining the crystal buildings with obvious fascination. "These structures are beautiful, but they are fragile. Standard transport containers would crush your people. We need something completely different. What are you thinking?" Morrison asked. Turner pulled out a data pad and began sketching rapidly. "Gel suspension pods. We fill transport containers with a special gel that supports their crystal structure, while providing the right atmospheric mixture. It will be like floating in a protective bubble." "How long to design and build these pods?" Morrison asked. "For 12 billion people?" "Normally, it would take years." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "How about abnormally?" Turner grinned. "Give me 72 hours. Meanwhile, navigation specialist Garcia was studying the planet's orbital mechanics with Colorian scientists. "Your sun is throwing off massive solar flares every few days. The radiation levels spike to lethal levels during each flare. We need to time our evacuation runs between the flares." "Impossible," said Chief Scientist Velnox, the flares are unpredictable. Sometimes there are 3 in one day, sometimes none for a week. Garcia studied the solar data for several minutes, then pointed to a pattern on the display. Not unpredictable. Look at the magnetic field fluctuations. There is a cycle, but it is very complex. I can predict the flares about 6 hours in advance. How? Velnox asked, amazed. I used to navigate through the asteroid fields back home. You learn to read patterns in chaos. As the humans worked, word of their arrival spread throughout the galaxy. The Draknari sent a battle fleet to observe the evacuation, expecting to watch the humans fail spectacularly. General Thokvar established his command ship at the edge of the system and began broadcasting running commentary on human activities. Deathworld primitives have arrived, he announced to his crew. Watch as they struggle with problems that would challenge the greatest minds in the galaxy. But as the days passed, the Draknari found themselves watching something entirely different. The humans were not struggling. They were succeeding in ways that defied logic. When the first major solar flare threatened to destroy several evacuation ships, Chief Engineer Turner improvised a solution using mining equipment and spare parts. He jury-rigged magnetic deflectors. That channeled the deadly radiation around the ships instead of through them. Impossible, muttered the Draknari chief engineer. Those deflectors should not work. The power requirements alone should have overloaded their systems. But the human ships kept working, kept evacuating Colorians, kept solving problems that should have been unsolvable. Dr. Ward faced a crisis when the first transport of Colorians began suffering from structural damage during the journey. Their delicate crystal bodies were fracturing under the stress of space travel, even in the specially designed gel pods. We need to reduce the gravity stress, she told Morrison over the communication link. How? I am going to modify the ship's artificial gravity generators to create a zero-gravity environment in the transport sections. It has never been done before, but the theory is sound. Do it. 48 hours later, Dr. Ward had successfully created the first zero-gravity transport system for crystalline beings. The Colorians floated safely in their gel pods, completely protected from the stresses of space travel. The Vorthek Collective's observation ship arrived shortly after, and Prime Calculator Zen-44 began running constant analysis of human activities. Their success rate is statistically impossible, the artificial being reported to its superiors. They are using inefficient technology, improvised solutions, and operating under extreme time pressure. According to all logical calculations, they should have failed within the first week. Yet they have not failed, observed another Vorthek calculator. Correct. They appear to be succeeding through what they call making it work. This concept does not exist in our databases. Communications Officer Clark faced her own challenge when the sheer volume of coordinating hundreds of ships and billions of evacuees threatened to overwhelm their communication systems. She solved it by creating a translation network that allowed real-time coordination between human crews, Colorian civilians, and evacuation coordinators. How did you develop this so quickly? Asked a Colorian communications specialist. Clark shrugged. I used to coordinate air traffic control for Earth's busiest spaceport. This is just bigger. As the evacuation entered its second week, the impossible was becoming routine. Human ships made multiple trips between Viridian Prime and the temporary staging areas they had established throughout the system. The specially designed gel pods allowed them to transport thousands of Colorians per ship per trip. Navigation specialist Garcia's solar flare predictions proved accurate, allowing the evacuation fleet to avoid the worst radiation storms. When smaller flares occurred during transport runs, Turner's improvised magnetic deflectors protected the ships and their passengers. Ambassador Zixtal stood in the command center of Morrison's ship, watching the organized chaos of the evacuation effort. Humans ran from station to station, shouting orders, making split-second decisions, and somehow making everything work despite the apparent disorder. "Captain Morrison," he said quietly, "your people are remarkable." Morrison looked up from a status report, his face tired but determined. "Ambassador, we are just getting started." 3 months into the evacuation, Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the ESV Liberty, watching the latest solar flare data with growing concern. The star was dying faster than anyone had predicted. What should have been small manageable flares were becoming massive radiation storms that could cook a ship's crew in minutes. "How many Calorians are left on the surface?" he asked Communications Officer Clark. "About 400 million, Captain. Most are in the deep underground cities, but those facilities are starting to fail too." Dr. Ward looked up from her medical station, her face grim. "Captain, I am reading massive radiation spikes from the star. This is not normal flare activity." Navigation specialist Garcia was bent over his instruments, running calculations frantically. "Captain, the star's magnetic field is collapsing. We are about to see the biggest solar flare in this system's history." "How big?" Morrison asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Big enough to sterilize the planet's surface. Everything above ground will be dead within 6 hours of the flare hitting." Chief Engineer Turner's voice crackled over the communication system from the engine room. "Captain, if this flare is as big as Garcia says, our magnetic deflectors will not be enough. Any ship caught in that radiation storm will be cooked." Morrison felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 400 million Calorians were still on Viridian Prime. The smart thing to do would be to evacuate the human fleet immediately. They had already saved over 11 billion lives. By any reasonable measure, the mission was a success, but Morrison looked at the tactical display showing the remaining Calorian population centers. Deep underground, 400 million innocent beings waited for rescue. Most were children and elderly Calorians who had been too fragile to evacuate in the earlier waves. "How long until the flare hits?" Morrison asked. 8 hours, Garcia replied. "How long to evacuate the remaining population?" Dr. Ward ran the numbers. "With our current fleet, at least 12 hours, maybe more." The bridge fell silent. Everyone understood what those numbers meant. They could not evacuate everyone before the flare hit, but they could save some of them if they started immediately. Morrison activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All ships, this is Captain Morrison. We have a situation." He explained the solar flare data and the time constraints. Across the fleet, hundreds of ship captains listened to the impossible choice they faced. Leave now and live, or stay and try to save as many Calorians as possible before the radiation killed them all. The first response came from Captain Kevin Blake of the transport ship New York. "Captain Morrison, the New York is heading to the surface now. We can fit about 50,000 Calorians if we pack them tight." "Blake, you understand the risk?" Morrison asked. "Yes, sir. My crew voted. We are going down." One by one, ship captains across the fleet made the same choice. The cargo hauler Detroit, the passenger liner Boston, the mining ship Denver. Even the small escort vessels volunteered for suicide runs to the surface. Morrison felt pride and terror in equal measure. This was humanity at its best and worst. Too brave for their own good, too stubborn to accept defeat, too compassionate to abandon innocent lives. "All right, people," Morrison announced. "This is our last chance. We go down, we load up with as many Calorians as possible, and we get out before the flare hits. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Get in, get out." But even as he said it, Morrison knew that heroics and unnecessary risks were exactly what the mission required. The evacuation fleet dove toward Viridian Prime's surface like falling stars. Ship after ship landed at Calorian evacuation sites. loading desperate families into transport containers and cargo holds. The Colorians moved with surprising speed, understanding that this was their last chance. Chief Engineer Turner coordinated the surface operations from his position in the Liberty's engine room. His magnetic deflectors were already struggling against the increasing radiation from the star. "Captain, the radiation levels are climbing faster than predicted," he reported. "I can keep the deflectors running, but if I lose power to the engines, we will not be able to escape the gravity." Well, Dr. Ward was treating human crew members who had been exposed to dangerous radiation levels during the surface operations. "Captain, we are losing people. The radiation is cooking us faster than I can treat the exposure." But the evacuation continued. Ship after ship loaded with Colorians and lifted off from the surface. Some made it to orbit safely. Others suffered system failures and had to make emergency repairs in space. A few did not make it at all. The cargo ship Atlanta suffered a complete power failure during takeoff. Captain Sarah Davis and her crew of 43 humans died instantly when their ship crashed back to the surface. But they had saved 60,000 Colorians, who were transferred to other ships before the crash. The passenger liner Miami lost its navigation systems in the radiation storm. Captain Robert Chun deliberately flew his ship into Viridian Prime's moon to avoid crashing into the evacuation fleet. His sacrifice saved the lives of 8 other ships and their Colorian passengers. Morrison watched ship after ship make the ultimate sacrifice as the solar flare built toward its peak. His tactical display showed radiation levels climbing toward lethal levels throughout the system. "Captain," Garcia called out urgently, "I am reading massive magnetic fluctuations from the star. The flare is starting." On the main screen, Viridian Prime's star began to brighten ominously. Streams of deadly radiation poured out from its surface like the breath of an angry god. "All ships, emergency ascent now," Morrison ordered. "Everyone off the surface immediately." But 3 ships were still on the ground, loading the last groups of Colorian children from the deepest underground shelters. The transport ship Phoenix, the cargo hauler Oregon, and the mining vessel Texas had volunteered for the final runs. "Phoenix, Oregon, Texas, you need to leave now," Morrison commanded. Captain Linda Murphy of the Phoenix replied calmly, "Captain Morrison, we have 5,000 Colorian children on board, but there are still 2,000 more in the shelter. We need another 10 minutes. You do not have 10 minutes. The flare will hit in 6. Then we better work faster." Morrison watched helplessly as the 3 ships continued loading Colorian children while the star above them prepared to unleash death across the entire system. The radiation levels were already high enough to kill unprotected humans in minutes. Turner's voice came over the communication system, strained with effort. "Captain, I am losing power to the magnetic deflectors. The radiation is overloading our systems. How long can you hold them?" "Maybe 20 minutes. After that, we are as dead as everyone else." Morrison made the hardest decision of his life. "Turner, transfer all remaining power to the Colorian life support systems." "Captain, that will leave us defenseless against the radiation." "I know. Do it." Turner was quiet for a moment. "Yes, sir. It has been an honor serving with you, Captain." The Liberty's deflectors failed just as the Phoenix, Oregon, and Texas cleared Viridian Prime's atmosphere. The last 7,000 Colorian children were safe, but the evacuation fleet was now completely exposed to the incoming radiation storm. Morrison looked around the bridge at his crew. Communications Officer Clark was still coordinating the final ship movements. Navigation Specialist Garcia was plotting escape routes for the other vessels. Dr. Ward was treating radiation poisoning in crew members while suffering from it herself. They were all going to die, but they had saved nearly 12 billion lives. The solar flare hit Viridian Prime like the hammer of an angry god. The planet's surface turned into a radioactive wasteland in seconds. The evacuation fleet, caught in the edge of the radiation storm, fought desperately to escape the system. Some ships made it. Others did not. But as the last human vessel cleared the system's edge, Admiral Kane received the final transmission. From Captain Morrison, mission accomplished. 12 billion Colorians evacuated. The price was acceptable. Then the transmission ended and the heroes of the evacuation fleet became legends. 6 months after the evacuation of Viridian Prime, Ambassador Zix Tal stood before the Galactic Council on the neutral world of Centaurus Station. The Great Assembly Hall was filled with representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. Drachnary warriors sat beside Vorthic calculators. Asterian traders whispered to Luminari diplomats. All of them had come to hear what the Colorian ambassador had to say about the humans. ZY Xtal's crystalline form glowed brighter than it had in years. His people were alive and thriving on New Colorian, the world the humans had helped them reach. The colony was growing stronger every day, with Colorian children playing in crystal gardens that sparkled under a safe, stable sun. Honored delegates, Zix Tal began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. I stand before you today to speak of a species that changed everything we thought we knew about civilization. General Thokvar of the Drachnary hegemony shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had witnessed the human evacuation operation firsthand, and it still disturbed his understanding of how the galaxy worked. 6 months ago, my people faced extinction, Zix Tal continued. Our sun was dying, and deadly radiation was killing 12 billion innocent souls. We sent out a plea for help to every advanced civilization in the galaxy. Prime Calculator Zen-44 of the Vorthic Collective processed this information with perfect recall. The resource expenditure required made assistance illogical, the artificial being stated. Yes, Zix Tal replied. Every one of you calculated the cost and decided it was too high. Every one of you had perfectly logical reasons for refusing to help. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The various species began shifting uncomfortably as they remembered their responses to the Colorian plea. Then came the humans, Zix Tal said, and his inner light flared brighter. A species from a world so harsh that you classify it as a death world. Beings you considered primitive, backwards, and irrelevant. He activated a holographic display that showed footage from the evacuation. The assembled delegates watched in silence as human ships dove through radiation storms, as crews sacrificed themselves to save strangers, as Captain Morrison made his final transmission. They came without hesitation, Zix Tal said. They asked for nothing in return. They risked everything to save people they had never met. And when faced with certain death, they chose to save others rather than save themselves. General Thokvar stood up abruptly. This proves nothing. The humans were fools who threw away their lives for no strategic gain. Were they? Zix Tal asked quietly. General, how many of your warriors volunteered to die for complete strangers? The Drachnary general fell silent. Around the assembly hall, other delegates avoided making eye contact with the Colorian ambassador. Zix Tal continued his testimony. Chief Engineer Alex Turner gave his life maintaining the magnetic deflectors that protected Colorian children. Dr. Susan Ward died treating radiation poisoning in both humans and Colorians. Navigation specialist Tony Garcia plotted escape routes for other ships while his own vessel burned around him. The holographic display showed more footage. Human crews working frantically to save Colorian lives. Ships diving into radiation storms to rescue the last evacuees. Captain Morrison transferring all power to life support for the Colorians, while leaving his own crew defenseless. Captain Jake Morrison could have saved his own ship and crew, Zix Tal said. He chose instead to ensure that 7,000 Colorian children would live. His last words were mission accomplished. The price was acceptable. Prime Calculator Zen-44 spoke up. Ambassador Zixtal, we acknowledge the human sacrifice. However, their actions were not logical. They gained nothing from this operation. Did they not? Zixtal asked. Look around this chamber. For the first time in centuries, every major civilization in the galaxy is gathered in one place. We are not here to discuss trade routes or territorial disputes. We are here because a species you dismissed as primitive showed us what we had forgotten. He gestured to the assembled delegates. When did we become so focused on profit and power that we forgot about basic decency? When did we decide that some lives were not worth saving? When did we become so civilized that we lost our compassion? The chamber fell completely silent. Species that had considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic civilization found themselves confronted with uncomfortable truths. The humans did not just save 12 billion Calorians, Zixtal continued. They saved something more important. They saved the idea that civilized beings should help each other. Admiral Lisa Kane entered the chamber at that moment, flanked by 2 human diplomats. She moved slowly, still recovering from radiation poisoning suffered during the evacuation. Behind her walked Chief Engineer Turner, his body permanently weakened. But his spirit unbroken. Dr. Ward followed, her medical expertise having saved countless lives during the operation. The assembly watched these humans with new eyes. They were not the primitive savages the galaxy had dismissed. They were heroes who had accomplished the impossible. Admiral Kane, Zixtal said, I believe the Council has something to say to you. Council Speaker Vex Prime, an ancient being from the first species to achieve interstellar travel, stood slowly. His voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of galactic history. Admiral Kane, humanity has been invited to join the Galactic Council as a full member. More than that, we formally request that Earth accept the position of Chief Disaster Response Coordinator for the galaxy. Admiral Kane stepped forward. We are honored by the invitation. But before we accept, I need to know something. Are you offering this position because you want to help others, or because you want someone else to take the risks? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the chamber, delegates from the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy struggled to answer. General Thokvar was the first to respond. Admiral, the Dreknary hegemony volunteers to provide military escort for all future rescue operations. Prime Calculator Zen 44 processed this for several seconds, then spoke. The Vorthek Collective will provide technological support and logistical analysis for humanitarian missions. One by one, other species began volunteering resources and support. The Asterian Trade Federation offered transport vessels. The Luminari Confederacy provided medical supplies. Even the isolationist Zenthari Empire pledged to open their borders for refugee movements. Admiral Kane smiled for the first time since the evacuation. Then we accept. As the formal ceremonies concluded, Admiral Kane found herself in a quiet corridor with Ambassador Zixtal. The Calorian diplomat's crystalline form pulsed with gentle light. Admiral, he said quietly, there is something else. You should know. Communications Officer Beth Clark survived the radiation storm. She is currently in our medical facilities on New Calorian, working on new translation protocols. Kane felt a surge of hope. How many others? More than we initially thought. Your ships were built tougher than anyone expected. Navigation specialist Garcia made it out with severe radiation poisoning but is recovering. Even Captain Morrison is alive, though he will never fully recover from his injuries. Where is he now? Zixtal's inner light flickered with what might have been amusement. He's on New Calorian, training Calorian rescue teams. He says that if we are going to help others, we need to learn how to do it properly. Kane laughed, and the sound echoed through the corridor. That sounds like Morrison. 3 days later, Admiral Kane received the first test of humanity's new role. A distress signal came from the outer rim. Pirates were attacking refugee ships, fleeing a civil war. The message was simple. Innocent people were dying, and they needed help. The response was immediate. Human ships launched from Earth within hours. Draknari escorts joined them at the rally point. Vorthek calculators provided real-time tactical analysis. Asterian transports carried medical supplies. For the first time in galactic history, multiple species worked together not for profit or conquest, but simply to help others. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the mixed fleet jump to hyperspace. Around her, human crew members worked alongside alien specialists. The Galactic Rescue Service had been born. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "we are receiving messages from across the galaxy. Dozens of species want to join the rescue service." Kane nodded. The galaxy is finally learning what humans have always known. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone else. As the fleet raced toward their first joint mission, Kane thought about Captain Morrison and his crew. They had given everything to save strangers, and in doing so, they had given the galaxy something it had forgotten it needed. They had given it hope.